just metal, Ohio. He dropped her father's dog tags in the dirt. Then he stepped on them. 40 football players watched. 30 cheerleaders watched. Nobody said a word. The freshman didn't scream. She didn't cry. She knelt down in the grass, picked up the chain, and brushed the dirt off the metal like she was cleaning something sacred. Then she looked him in the eye. "You still have a chance to step back." He laughed at her. So did his friends. For 6 weeks they laughed. They spread lies about her dead father. They planted evidence in her bag. They put bruises on her best friend's arm. They thought she was weak because she was quiet. They didn't know her father spent 20 years teaching soldiers how to fight with their bare hands, or that he taught his daughter everything he knew. In a dark parking lot, all 3 of them found out. The town of Ashford sits where the cornfields end and the college begins. It is not a big place. Everyone there knows someone who knows everyone else. On a Tuesday morning in late August, a moving truck pulled up outside a small brick dormitory on the edge of campus. A young woman climbed out of the passenger seat. Her name was Josephine Calloway. Most people would come to call her Jo. She was 18 years old. She had pale skin, light brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and eyes that watched more than they spoke. She carried 2 duffel bags, one in each hand. She did not need help. She had learned a long time ago how to carry her own weight. Inside one of those bags, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was a small wooden box. Inside that box was a set of dog tags. They belonged to her father. His name was Daniel Calloway. He had been a master sergeant in the United States Army. He had spent years teaching young soldiers how to fight with their hands, how to stay calm when everything around them was chaos. 3 years earlier, on an overseas deployment, he had been killed. Jo did not talk about it much. She did not need to. It lived inside her, quiet and steady, the way a heartbeat lives inside a chest. She walked into the dormitory. A woman at the front desk checked her name off a list and handed her a key. Room 214, 3rd floor, no elevator. By the time Jo reached the room, she was breathing a little harder, but her face gave nothing away. She set her bags down. A girl was already there, sitting cross-legged on one of the 2 beds, sorting through a box of photographs. "You must be Jo," the girl said. "I'm Nora. Nora Bennett." Nora had dark curly hair and a quick smile. She was a journalism major, she explained, though she had only been on campus for 2 days and had already made friends with half the building. "Nice to meet you," Jo said. That was all. Nora waited for more. It did not come. She would learn, over the following weeks, that Jo Calloway did not fill silence just to fill it. When she spoke, she meant it. Nora tried again anyway, because that was simply how she was built. "Where are you from?" "Small town in Ohio," Jo said. "You've probably never heard of it. Try me," Jo told her. Nora, true to prediction, had never heard of it and admitted as much with a laugh that put Jo slightly more at ease than she expected. They spent the next half hour arranging furniture, deciding who got which side of the room, the ordinary small negotiations of 2 strangers learning to share a space. Nora talked enough for both of them, filling the room with easy chatter about her hometown. Her older brother, the newspaper her mother still read every morning cover to cover before anyone else in the house, was allowed near the coffee pot. Jo listened more than she spoke, the way she usually did, though something about Nora's easy warmth made the listening feel less like distance and more like rest. Ashford State University was not a famous school. It did not have a football program that made national news. But in a town this small, the football team was still something close to royalty, and every royalty needs a court. At the center of that court stood a young man named Grant Sterling. Grant was the team's starting quarterback, and had been since his sophomore year. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy charm that made teachers forgive him and parents trust him without asking why. His father, Preston Sterling, owned 3 car dealerships across the county and sat on the university's board of trustees. When people in Ashford said the name Sterling, they said it the way you might say the name of a bank, with a kind of automatic respect. Grant had 2 friends who moved with him everywhere, the way shadows move with a body in the late afternoon sun. One was Wade Holloway, a linebacker with a temper that ran hot and fast. The other was a quieter young man named Cole Ashby, a wide receiver who rarely spoke firsts, but always laughed on cue. Together, the 3 of them had spent 2 years building a reputation. Not one they had earned through kindness, one they had earned through fear. Jo did not know any of this yet. On her first Wednesday at Ashford, all she knew was that cheerleading tryouts began at 4 o'clock in the university gymnasium, and she intended to be there early. She had cheered in high school, back home in a small town 3 states away. It had never been about the crowd for her. It was about the discipline, the counts, the trust between bodies moving in perfect time. Her father used to watch her practice in the driveway, arms crossed, saying nothing, but she always knew when he was proud. He had a particular way of nodding, just once, like he was checking something off a list only he could see. Her mother had passed when Jo was young enough that most of her memories of her had gone soft and hazy at the edges, more feeling than picture. It had been Daniel Calloway alone after that, raising a daughter between deployments and training rotations, leaning on neighbors and army wives, and later, on Jo herself, who grew up faster than most kids her age simply because there was no other option available. She did not resent it. She had never known any other way to grow up. And by the time she was old enough to compare her childhood to anyone else's, she had already decided she would not have traded the discipline he gave her for an easier version of the same life. The gymnasium smelled like rubber and floor wax. 30 girls stood in loose clusters, stretching, whispering, sizing each other up the way young athletes do before anything has even started. A woman in a gray tracksuit walked to the center of the floor and clapped twice. "All right, ladies, my name is Coach Diane Marsh. Let's get to work." Coach Marsh had been running the Ashford cheer program for 11 years. She had a face that did not smile easily, but eyes that missed nothing. She watched every jump, every landing, every flicker of hesitation in a girl's shoulders before a stunt. She watched Jo Calloway for exactly 4 seconds before she wrote something down on her clipboard. Jo's tumbling was clean, not flashy, controlled. When she landed, she did not wobble. When the coach called out a change in formation with no warning, Jo adjusted half a beat before anyone else did, like she had already expected it. Coach Marsh did not say anything to her that day, but she circled Jo's name twice. By Friday, the roster was posted outside the gym doors. Jo's name was on it. So was a girl named Paige Ferris, a small, soft-spoken freshman from 2 counties over, who hugged Jo without warning when she saw both their names on the list. "We made it," Paige said, laughing, a little embarrassed by her own excitement. "We made it," Jo agreed, and for the first time since she had arrived in Ashford, something in her chest loosened, just slightly. Paige had a nervous energy about her, quick to laugh, quicker to apologize for things that did not need apologizing for. She told Jo, walking back from the gym that afternoon, that she had almost not tried out at all, that she had stood outside the doors for 10 minutes trying to talk herself into it before finally going in. Jo recognized something familiar in that, a person still learning how much space she was allowed to take up in the world, and found herself, without quite deciding to, watching out for her the way an older sibling might, though neither of them had said so out loud. She did not know yet that this small, ordinary joy was about to be tested, and tested soon. The football team practiced on the field just beyond the gymnasium, and it was tradition, an old and unofficial one, for the cheer squad to run a joint drill with the team during the second week of the semester. It was meant to build camaraderie. Mostly it built hierarchy. The players stood along the sideline in loose rows, some stretching, some talking, most of them watching the cheerleaders warm up with the particular attention young men give to young women they have decided, without asking, belong to them somehow. Grant Sterling stood near the front, arms crossed, a slow smile on his face. Wade Holloway stood beside him. Cole Ashby a step behind, always a step behind. "New girl," Grant said, loud enough for half the field to hear. "You're the one from nowhere, right?" Jo turned toward the voice. She recognized him. Everyone on campus recognized him. His face was on a banner outside the student union. "I'm from Ohio," she said simply. A few players laughed, the easy laugh of people who already know what's coming and enjoy the anticipation. "Ohio," Grant repeated, like the word itself was funny. "That explains the shoes." Jo looked down at her sneakers. They were plain white, a little worn at the toe. Nothing special. She had bought them with her own money, working weekend shifts at a diner the summer before college. "They work fine," she said, and turned back toward her teammates, ready to keep warming up. That should have been the end of it. In another world, on another day, it might have been. But Grant Sterling was not used to being the second to last word in a conversation. He stepped closer. "You know what I heard?" he said, his voice carrying now, pulling more eyes toward them. "I heard your dad was some kind of soldier, died overseas or something." The field went quiet in that particular way a room goes quiet when everyone senses a line is about to be crossed, and no one is brave enough to stop it. Jo's spine straightened, just slightly. Her voice, when it came, was even. "That's right. That's rough," Grant said, and there was nothing rough in his tone at all. There was something closer to amusement. "Must be hard. Growing up broke, moving around, dad gets shipped off, doesn't come back. Real sad story." Wade laughed. Cole smiled at the ground. Something in Joe's chest tightened, but her face did not change. She had learned long ago, from a man who had taught soldiers twice her size how to control their breathing under fire, that the first battle is always the one inside your own ribs. "Is there something you need?" Joe asked. "Or are you just talking?" For a moment, something flickered across Grant's face. Surprise, maybe. He was not used to being asked a direct question by someone he had decided in his own mind was beneath him. He recovered quickly. He always did. "I need you to understand something," he said, stepping close enough now that Joe could smell the mint on his breath. "This isn't Ohio. This is my school, my team. My squad if I want it to be. It's not your squad." Coach Marsh's voice cut across the field, sharp and sudden. She had been walking toward them, though not fast enough, not soon enough. "Sterling, get back to your side of the field." Grant raised both hands, a picture of innocence. "Just talking, Coach." But as he turned to walk away, his eyes dropped to Joe's collar, where a thin silver chain disappeared beneath her practice shirt. He reached out, faster than anyone expected, and hooked 2 fingers under the chain. He pulled. The clasp snapped. The chain came free in his hand, 2 small metal tags swinging from it, catching the afternoon sun. "What is this?" Grant said, turning the tags over in his palm, reading the stamped letters aloud, mockingly. "Callaway, D. Army." "Give it back," Joe said. Her voice did not rise, but something underneath it had changed, gone still and cold, like water just before it freezes. Grant smiled at Wade. Wade smiled back. "Relax," Grant said. "It's just some old dog tags. What's the big deal?" "It's my father's," Joe said. "Give it back." Grant held it up, studying it like an object in a museum he found faintly boring. "You wear this thing like it means something, like it makes you special." He shrugged. "It's just metal, Ohio." And then he dropped it. He let it fall to the turf deliberately, and before Joe could reach it, his sneaker came down on top of it. He ground his heel, just slightly, into the dirt. "There," he said. "Now it means even less." The field was silent. 30 cheerleaders, 40 football players. Not one of them said a word. Fear has a particular quiet, a held breath that spreads through a crowd like weather. Even Paige, standing a few feet from Joe, had gone pale and still, her hands pressed together in front of her. This was the moment. Later, people who were there that day would describe it in different ways. Some would say Joe's face went red. Others would say she went completely white. What almost everyone agreed on when the story was told and retold around Ashford in the weeks that followed was this: she did not yell. She did not cry. She walked forward, slowly, past Grant Sterling and knelt down in the grass. She picked up the chain. She brushed the dirt from the metal tags with her thumb, gently, the way you might clean something you loved. Then she stood, and for the first time, she looked directly into Grant's eyes. "You still have a chance to step back," she said. It was quiet. It was not a threat, not the way threats usually sound. There was no anger in it at all, but something in the stillness of it made Wade's smile falter, just for a second. Something in it made even Grant blink, though he covered it fast with a laugh. "Step back from what?" he said. "You gonna cry about it?" Joe did not answer. She turned, walked back to her place in line, and finished practice like nothing had happened at all. Joe did not go straight back to her dorm that evening. She walked the long way, past the edge of the football field, out toward the tree line where the practice fields gave way to open grass. She sat down there, alone for a while, the metal tags cool in her closed fist. She thought of her father, the way she often did in moments like this, not with sadness exactly, but with a kind of steadying weight, like a hand on her shoulder. He had taught her to fight when she was 12 years old, in the backyard of their small house, using nothing but an old wrestling mat and more patience than most men ever show a child. He never taught her to hurt people. He was careful about that, almost stubborn about it. "Fighting is not about winning," he used to say, kneeling across from her on the mat, correcting the angle of her elbow with 2 gentle fingers. "Fighting is about not losing something you can't get back." She had not understood it then. She had been 12, more interested in getting the throw right than in the philosophy behind it. She understood it better now. He used to run drills with her before school some mornings, quiet ones, just the 2 of them in the gray early light, going over balance, footwork, how to fall without breaking, how to read another person's shoulders before they move. He never explained why it mattered so much to him that she know these things. She had assumed back then it was simply what fathers who had spent their lives training soldiers did with their daughters, an old habit that did not know how to turn itself off at home. She understood now that it had been something else, a kind of insurance, a gift he had given her without ever saying its real name, because some gifts are easier to hand over quietly, folded inside ordinary mornings, then to hand over with a speech attached. She sat in the grass a while longer, the last of the evening light fading gold across the practice fields, and then she stood, brushed off her shorts, and walked back toward the dorm, the tags tucked safely back beneath her collar, close to her chest, exactly where they belonged. That night, Coach Marsh sat alone in her office long after the gym had emptied, staring at a blank page in her notebook. She had coached for 11 years. She had seen scared freshmen. She had seen angry freshmen. She had seen freshmen who cried the first time someone was cruel to them, and freshmen who cried the first time someone was cruel to somebody else. She had never seen a freshman kneel down, pick up something precious off the ground, dust it off with that kind of care, and walk away calm. She wrote one line at the bottom of the page: "Watch Callaway." She did not know yet what she was watching for. She only knew, in the particular way a coach learns to trust her gut over 11 years of practice fields, that something about this girl did not add up the way it should. Word of what happened on the field spread through campus fast, the way these things always do in a small school in a small town. By the next morning, most people had heard some version of it. Some versions were kind to Joe. Some were not. "I heard she just stood there and took it," one sophomore said in the dining hall, loud enough for Joe to hear from 2 tables away. "Like she didn't even care." "Maybe she's just weird," someone else said. Joe ate her breakfast without looking up. She had learned, over 18 years, that explaining yourself to people who had already decided what they thought of you was a waste of breath, better spent elsewhere. Nora sat down across from her, sliding a tray onto the table with a thud. "You know everyone's talking about you, right?" Nora said. "I figured. You're not going to say anything about it?" Joe looked up. "What would I say?" Nora studied her for a moment, the way a journalist studies a subject who is giving her nothing to write down. "I don't know. Most people would be pretty upset. Guy destroys something that belonged to your dad in front of 40 people, and you just, what, picked it up and walked away?" "There wasn't anything else useful to do," Joe said. "Useful," Nora repeated, tasting the word. "That's an interesting way to put it." Joe shrugged and went back to her breakfast, and Nora let it go, for now. But she noticed something that morning that she would remember later, much later, when the whole story finally came together in her mind like pieces of a photograph developing in a dark room. She noticed that when Joe picked up her coffee cup, her hand was completely steady. Not one tremor. Not one. By the following Monday, a rumor had started, small at first, then growing the way rumors do when nobody bothers to correct them. Someone suggested Joe had lied on her financial aid application, that her story about a dead soldier father was invented for sympathy, a way to get free tuition off the backs of people who actually deserved it. It was not true. Joe's father's death benefits and the small survivor's pension the Army provided were public record, filed and processed years earlier, entirely legitimate. But truth, Joe was learning, moved slower than gossip, especially when gossip had Grant Sterling's name attached to it, spreading it with the casual confidence of someone who had never once been told no. Joe did not defend herself. She had one conversation about it, and only one, with Paige, who came to her crying that Monday afternoon, after hearing girls on the squad repeating the rumor in the locker room. "They're saying you made it up," Paige said. "About your dad?" "I know," Joe said. "Aren't you going to say something? Tell them it's not true?" Joe was quiet for a moment, folding a towel with careful precision. The way she folded everything, corners matched exactly. "My dad used to say something," she finally said. He said, "Don't waste your anger on people who aren't worth it. Save it. You'll need it someday for something that actually matters." "But this matters," Paige said. "They're lying about your family." "It matters to me," Joe agreed. "It doesn't matter to them." "Not really. They just want a reaction. If I give them one, I'm giving them exactly what they want." Paige wiped her eyes and nodded slowly, though Joe could tell she did not fully understand. Not yet. She was young in a different way than Joe was young. She had not yet learned the particular arithmetic of choosing your battles, the kind of math that only gets taught by loss. What Joe did instead of arguing was something smaller, something almost invisible. She began carrying a small notebook in her bag, the kind you could buy for $1 at the campus bookstore. In it, in small, neat handwriting, she began writing down dates, times, what was said, who said it, who was standing nearby. She did not know, not yet, exactly why she was doing it. It was simply a habit her father had drilled into her without ever quite explaining why. "Write it down," he used to say. "Memory lies. Paper doesn't." It would be many weeks before that notebook mattered to anyone but her. For now, it was simply a quiet act of patience, the kind of patience that looks, to an outside eye, almost like nothing at all. 2 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon, the cheer squad held an advanced practice, working on a difficult pyramid formation that required 3 girls on the bottom, 2 in the middle, and 1 flyer at the top. It was Paige's turn to fly that day. The gym was hot, the air thick with the smell of sweat and rubber mats. Coach Marsh called the count. The formation went up smoothly, the base girls locking their arms, the middle layer climbing into position. Then, at the top, Paige's foot slipped. It happened fast, the way accidents always do. Faster than thought, faster than fear. 1 second she was rising into the extension, arms lifted. And the next second her balance broke, her body tipping backward, out past the reach of the girls meant to catch her. There was a half second where everyone in the gym seemed to freeze. The particular stillness of watching something terrible begin to happen and being unable, yet, to stop it. Jo moved. She was standing several feet away, not even part of that stunt group, spotting a different formation entirely. But her body crossed the distance before her mind had fully caught up to what it was doing. She got under Paige at the last possible second, absorbing the fall with her shoulder and forearm in one smooth motion, redirecting the momentum downward and sideways instead of straight down onto the mat, the exact way a person trained to catch falling's weight learns to do it, the exact way soldiers are taught to break a partner's fall during hand-to-hand drills. Both girls went down together but controlled, cushioned, safe. Paige landed hard on her side but unhurt. Jo took most of the impact on her own shoulder and rolled with it, coming up onto one knee in a single fluid motion, already reaching out to check Paige's arms, her neck, her breathing, the way you would check an injured teammate in the field. Fast, methodical, calm. "I'm okay," Paige gasped, more shocked than hurt. "I'm okay. I think I'm okay." The gym was silent again, but this silence was different from the one on the football field. This silence was full of something closer to awe. Coach Marsh crossed the floor in seconds, kneeling beside both girls, checking Paige over with practiced hands. But her eyes kept flicking to Jo, to the way Jo had moved, to the exact angle of that catch, the perfect, almost surgical control of it. "Where did you learn to do that?" Coach Marsh asked quietly. Once she was satisfied Paige was truly unharmed. Jo helped Paige to her feet before answering. "My dad taught me. A long time ago." "That's not cheer training," Coach Marsh said. "That's something else." Jo did not answer right away. She glanced around at the rest of the team, all of them staring, some still frozen mid-gasp. And something in her expression closed, gently but firmly, like a door easing shut. "He used to teach soldiers," she said finally, "how to fall, how to catch, how not to get hurt when things go wrong fast." Coach Marsh studied her for a long moment. She had coached long enough to know when a conversation had reached the edge of what someone was willing to say, and long enough to know better than to push past that edge uninvited. "Well," she said instead, standing, brushing off her knees, "whatever he taught you, it just saved this program a very expensive trip to the emergency room. Good work, Calloway." It was, by Ashford standards, high praise, but it was not the coach's reaction that lingered longest in the room. Standing near the gym's side entrance, a mop in one hand and a bucket at his feet, was a man in his 60s named Earl Whitcomb. He had worked maintenance at Ashford State for 2 years. Quiet, steady, mostly invisible to the students who walked past him every day without a second glance. He had a slight limp in his left leg, a buzz cut going gray, and forearms that still carried the particular corded strength of a much younger man, the kind of strength that does not entirely fade, even decades later. He had been sweeping near the doorway when the fall happened. He had seen the whole thing. He did not move at first. He stood very still, watching Jo help Paige to her feet, watching the careful, practiced way she checked her teammates' arms and shoulders for injury, watching the particular economy of motion in everything she did. No wasted movement, no panic, just clean, trained reflex. Something in his face shifted. It was not surprise, exactly. It was closer to recognition. The look of a man who has just heard from very far away a piece of music he has not heard in a long, long time, and cannot immediately place but knows, somewhere deep in his chest, exactly where he has heard it before. He set his mop against the wall. He walked closer, slow, unhurried, the limp in his leg more visible when he moved with purpose. He stopped a respectful distance away, waiting until the commotion around Paige had settled, until Jo had stepped back from the small crowd gathering around her stunt group. "That was good work," he said quietly, when Jo finally noticed him standing there. "Real good work." "Thank you," Jo said, a little surprised. Most of the maintenance staff kept to themselves during practice, rarely speaking to the athletes directly. Earl studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable. His eyes moved briefly to the thin silver chain visible at her collar, the two small metal tags catching the gym's fluorescent light. "Calloway," he said, almost to himself, reading the name off the sign-in sheet clipped to the gym door earlier that week, the one that listed the new cheer squad roster. "That's your name?" "Yes, sir." Something crossed his face again, quick, unreadable, gone almost before it arrived. "You take care of yourself," he said, and then, as if catching himself saying more than he meant to, he nodded once, turned, and walked back toward his mop and bucket without another word. Joe watched him go, a small crease of confusion forming between her eyebrows. There had been something in the way he said her name, something careful, something that sounded almost like a question he had decided, at the last moment, not to ask. She did not think much more of it that day. There was too much else happening. The ache in her shoulder from the catch, the adrenaline still working its way out of her blood, Paige hugging her twice more before practice ended, thanking her over and over. But she would think of it again, soon. That evening, back in the dorm room, Joe sat on her bed with an ice pack pressed to her shoulder, going through the contents of her open duffel bag, looking for a clean shirt. Nora sat across from her on the other bed, half doing homework, half watching Joe with the curious, unhidden attention of someone who has decided a person is more interesting than their textbook. "I heard about practice," Nora said. "Everyone's talking about it. The whole building is talking about it." "It wasn't a big deal," Joe said. "You caught a falling human being like it was nothing," Nora said. "That's a fairly big deal, Joe." Joe did not answer, focused instead on folding the shirt she'd found. Corners matched, the same careful precision she brought to everything. It was in reaching past a folded sweatshirt that Nora's eyes caught on something at the bottom of the open bag. An envelope, cream-colored, aged at the edges, sealed shut, with a single word written across the front in handwriting that was clearly not Joe's. "Joe." Nora did not touch it, but she looked at it a beat too long, and Joe noticed. "That's private," Joe said, not sharply, but with a firmness that closed the subject before it had really opened. "Sorry," Nora said, and meant it. She looked back down at her textbook, but her mind was already turning the moment over, the way a journalist's mind cannot help but turn things over. A sealed letter, never opened, from the careful, undisturbed look of the seal, kept at the very bottom of a bag beneath everything else, the way you keep something you are not ready to touch yet. "Can I ask," Nora said carefully, after a minute of quiet, "who it's from?" Joe was quiet for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was softer than Nora had heard it before. Softer than the voice that had faced down Grant Sterling on the football field without a single tremor. "My dad," she said. "He wrote it before he left the last time. Told me not to open it unless I really needed to." "Needed to how?" Joe zipped the duffel bag closed, tucking the envelope safely back inside out of sight. "I don't know yet," she said. "I guess I'll know when it's time." She said it simply, without drama, the way she said most things. But something in her face, just for a moment, looked very young, and very tired, and very far from home. Nora did not push further. She had learned, in just a few short weeks of rooming with Joe Calloway, that some doors were not meant to be opened by force. Some doors opened on their own time, when the person holding the key finally decided it was time to turn it. Still, later that night after Joe had fallen asleep, Nora lay awake for a long while, staring at the ceiling, turning the day over in her mind the way she turned over every story that snagged on something inside her and refused to let go. She thought about the rumor spreading through the dining halls, a rumor she was almost certain now was false, though she had no proof of that yet, only instinct. She thought about the way Joe's hand had not shaken once, not on the football field, not over coffee the next morning. She thought about the maintenance worker's face in the gym doorway, the way he had said the name Calloway, like it meant something to him personally, and then walked away before anyone could ask why. Nora was a journalism major for a reason. She had grown up in a house where her mother read 3 newspapers a day and taught her, before she could properly spell, that the most interesting stories were rarely the ones people were telling loudly. They were the ones sitting quietly underneath, waiting for someone patient enough to notice them. She did not have a story yet. Not really. Just a feeling, small and persistent, the kind that keeps a person awake past midnight without quite explaining itself. She would understand it better soon. For now, she simply reached for the notebook on her nightstand, the one she used for class notes, and wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page. Watch the letter. Then she turned off the lamp and let the quiet of the dorm settle around her, unaware that across town, in a small rented house not far from campus, A retired soldier named Earl Whitcomb was sitting at his own kitchen table that same night, staring at a photograph he had not taken out of his wallet in almost 2 years, running his thumb slowly across the faces of men he had once called brothers. One of those faces belonged to a younger version of a man named Daniel Calloway. Earl had not said his name out loud in a long time, but he had recognized it the moment he read it off that sign-in sheet, the way you recognize a voice from another room before you can even see the face attached to it. He did not know yet what he was going to do with that recognition. He only knew, sitting there in his quiet kitchen with the photograph in his weathered hands, that some promises do not expire just because time has passed. Some promises simply wait, patient as a held breath, for the moment they are needed most. Outside their window, the Ashford campus settled into evening, porch lights flickering on across the quad, the distant sound of the marching band practicing somewhere near the stadium, the ordinary noise of a small college town going about its small college business, unaware that inside room 214, a story had already begun that would, before the semester ended, pull nearly all of them into it. Grant Sterling, 3 buildings away in his apartment near the football complex, was telling Wade Holloway and Cole Ashby a slightly exaggerated version of what had happened at practice that day, laughing about the way the whole gym had gone quiet, calling Jo a show-off, calling her dramatic, calling her a dozen things that were not true. Because it was easier to mock something you did not understand than to sit with the discomfort of not understanding it. "She's weird," Wade agreed, cracking open a soda. "Something's off about her." "She's nothing," Grant said, though something in his voice, if anyone had been listening closely enough, did not sound entirely convinced of his own words. "She's just some scholarship kid trying to make herself look interesting." He did not mention, because he had not let himself think about it too closely, the way Jo had looked at him on the field, calm, unshaken, entirely unafraid. He did not mention the particular chill that look had put through him, brief and unwelcome, gone the moment he laughed it off with his friends. He had grown up his whole life being the littlest person in every room he entered, and the world had rewarded him for it every single time, with laughter, with attention, with people stepping aside to let him pass. He did not yet understand what it meant to meet someone who simply did not need the room's attention at all. He would understand, eventually. Everyone in Ashford would. The following week, word of the incident on the football field, softened into something closer to gossip than concern, found its way to Preston Sterling himself during a Rotary Club lunch downtown, where half the room seemed to know half the other half's business before it happened. "Heard your boy had some kind of run-in with a new cheerleader," one of the older men at the table said, more amused than concerned. "Something about her dog tags." Preston Sterling waved a hand, unbothered, cutting into his steak. "Boys being boys, Grant's a good kid." "Kids talk." He said it the way he said most things about his son, with the easy confidence of a man who had never once had to clean up a mess Grant could not talk his way out of. "You know how freshmen are. Everybody's got a sob story these days." He did not ask for details. He did not think, even for a moment, that he needed to. In 18 years of being Grant Sterling's father, nothing had ever come back around to cost him anything more than a phone call and a tuition check. He had no reason yet to believe this would be any different. He went back to his steak, and the conversation moved on to county road repairs, and the whole matter was forgotten by dessert, at least by him. It was not forgotten by everyone. There is a particular kind of mistake that only confident people make. It is the mistake of assuming quiet means empty. Assuming stillness means nothing is happening underneath it. Grant Sterling had made that mistake 100 times before in his short life, with teachers, with coaches, with anyone who did not raise their voice to match his own. And it had never once cost him anything. He did not know yet that some rooms hold more than they show. He did not know that some silences are not surrender at all, but simply patience, wearing a very plain, very ordinary face. Jo Calloway had grown up watching a man who understood that difference better than almost anyone. She had watched him stay calm in arguments that would have made other men shout. She had watched him absorb insults from people who did not understand what he had given up for this country, and answer them, if he answered at all, with nothing sharper than a level voice and a steady gaze. "It is not weakness to hold your fire," he told her once, on one of those gray early mornings on the mat. "It is control. And control is the only thing nobody can take from you." She had carried that sentence with her every day since he died, folded somewhere close to the center of her, the way she now carried his dog tags close to her collarbone, hidden beneath her shirt, but never far from her skin. Ashford did not know yet what it had welcomed onto its campus that August. The football players did not know it. The gossiping sophomores in the dining hall did not know it. Even Coach Marsh, sharp-eyed as she was, only understood a piece of it, a fragment glimpsed in one perfect practice catch on a gym floor. Only Earl Whitcomb understood the whole shape of it, and even he was only beginning to remember. The semester had barely started. The leaves along the quad had not yet begun to turn. Homecoming was still weeks away, a date circled on calendars across campus for entirely different reasons than the one it would eventually come to mean. But somewhere in the quiet architecture of small decisions, the kind nobody notices while they are happening, something had already been set into motion. A notebook filling with dates, a sealed envelope waiting at the bottom of a bag, a promise remembered over a kitchen table 2 years after it was made, a journalist's instinct refusing to let go of a feeling she could not yet explain. None of it looked like very much yet. That is how these things always begin. Quietly, almost invisibly. A girl kneeling in the grass to pick something up off the ground, brushing the dirt away with more care than the moment seemed to require. Nobody watching her that day understood they were watching the opening move of something much larger. Nobody except perhaps the old man with the limp, standing very still near a doorway, remembering a face he had not let himself think about in a very long time. Ashford would understand eventually. All of it. Every piece. They had chosen their target without knowing a single thing about her. They were about to learn. Somewhere back in Ohio, in a small house that still smelled faintly of cedar in the hall closet, a framed photograph sat on a mantel. A man in uniform, standing beside a row of other soldiers, all of them squinting into bright sun, all of them younger than they would ever look again. Jo kept a copy of that same photograph folded inside her wallet, worn soft at the creases from being taken out and looked at more times than she could count. She had not shown it to anyone at Ashford yet. She would before this was over, but not yet. For now, there was only patience, the kind her father had taught her, the kind that looks, from the outside, almost exactly like doing nothing at all. By the second week of September, Ashford State had settled into the rhythm every college town settles into once the newness wears off. Classes filled the mornings. Practice filled the afternoons. The dining hall filled every evening with the same easy noise, trays clattering, laughter rising and falling, nobody paying much attention to anybody else's business. Except that was not quite true. Not for Jo Calloway. Her name still followed her through hallways, quieter now, but not gone. The rumor about her financial aid had faded some, replaced by a newer, stranger version of itself, the way rumors do when nobody bothers to correct them. Some people now said she had been kicked off her old high school squad for lying about her father. Others said she had never had a father in the military at all, that the whole story was invented for sympathy. None of it was true. All of it kept moving anyway. Jo did not chase it down to correct it. She went to class. She went to practice. She wrote small, careful notes in the dollar store notebook she kept in her bag, dates, times, names, the same quiet habit her father had drilled into her without ever fully explaining why. She was beginning to understand why. Grant Sterling had gone quiet too, in his own way. He had not approached her directly since the incident on the football field, but quiet for Grant was never the same thing as finished. It was simply a different kind of waiting, the kind a cat does outside a mouse hole, patient and certain. He was not used to losing, even small moments like the one on the field. He had replayed it in his head more times than he would ever admit to Wade or Cole, the particular stillness in Jo's voice when she told him he still had a chance to step back. It bothered him in a way he could not name. A small burr caught under his skin that would not shake loose, no matter how many times he laughed it off in front of his friends. So he waited. And on a Tuesday afternoon, several weeks into the semester, not long after the gym floor incident that still had half the campus talking, he found his opening. The cheer squad shared a locker room with the women's volleyball team, a narrow space with 2 rows of gray lockers and a bench running down the middle. Bags were left there during practice, unlocked, the way they always had been, because nobody at Ashford had ever needed to lock them before. Cole Ashby had a younger cousin on the volleyball team, a fact almost nobody on campus knew. And it was through her, without her understanding what she was really being asked to do, that Cole learned which locker belonged to Jo Calloway and when the locker room would sit empty during afternoon practice. It took him 4 minutes. He did not need longer than that. He slid a folded sheet of paper into the outer pocket of Jo's gym bag, photocopied pages that looked, at a glance, exactly like the answer key to an upcoming physical fitness evaluation, The athletic department required every squad member to complete an evaluation that determined eligibility for the competitive travel roster. It was not the real answer key. It was close enough to pass for one, close enough to raise questions, and that was all it needed to be. He told no one but Grant and Wade what he had done. Grant smiled when he heard it, the particular satisfied smile of a man who believes he has finally found the lever that will move the thing he could not move by force. "She wants to play the quiet, tough girl," Grant said. "Let's see how tough she looks getting dragged in front of the athletic board." Wade laughed. Cole did not laugh quite as easily this time, though he said nothing. The following morning, an assistant coach doing a routine locker check for a missing equipment bag found the folded pages inside Joe's gym bag and, following protocol, reported it up the chain without knowing anything about how it had gotten there. By that afternoon, Joe was called into Coach Marsh's office. "Sit down," Coach Marsh said, and there was something careful in her voice, something that made Joe's stomach tighten before a single word of explanation had been given. Coach Marsh set folded pages on the desk between them. "These were found in your bag this morning." Joe looked at them for a long moment, genuinely confused. "I've never seen those before. They look like the answer sheet for Friday's fitness evaluation." "I didn't put those there," Joe said, and her voice, for the first time since Coach Marsh had known her, carried something close to alarm, though she kept it tightly controlled. "Coach, I wouldn't do that. I've never even seen the real evaluation." Coach Marsh studied her for a long moment. 11 years of coaching had taught her to read faces the way some people read weather, the small shifts before a storm arrives. She did not see guilt in Joe's face. She saw something closer to disbelief, and underneath that, a flicker of understanding, as though pieces were beginning to click together in Joe's mind even as she sat there. "I believe you," Coach Marsh said finally, quiet enough that it felt almost like a secret between them. "But this isn't just my decision anymore. It's gone up to the athletic department. There's a review process. I have to follow it." "What does that mean?" "It means you're suspended from practice and competition, pending investigation," Coach Marsh said. And something in her jaw tightened as she said it, the words clearly costing her more than she let show. "I'm sorry, Joe. I don't think you did this. But I don't get to decide that alone." Joe sat very still for a moment, absorbing it. Then she nodded once, the same careful, controlled nod her father used to give when a plan fell apart and there was nothing left to do but adjust. "Okay," she said quietly. "What do I need to do?" "Wait," Coach Marsh said. "For now, just wait. And Joe, if you have any idea how those pages ended up in your bag, now would be the time to say so." Joe thought of the locker room, unlocked, open all afternoon during practice. She thought of the way Grant had watched her. Weeks now, with the patience of someone counting on time to do work fists could not. She had no proof. Not yet. Only a feeling cold and certain settling low in her stomach. "I have an idea," she said carefully. "I don't have proof." "Write it down anyway," Coach Marsh said. "Everything. Dates, whatever you remember. It might matter later." Joe almost smiled at that despite everything. She was already doing exactly that. Had been doing it for weeks. In a small notebook her father had taught her to keep without ever explaining why until now. Coach Marsh did not let the matter rest as quietly as the meeting with Joe might have suggested. That same evening, after practice ended and the gym had emptied, she walked across campus to the athletic director's office, a folder of her own tucked under one arm, containing 11 years of notes on every freshman she had ever coached, and nothing in any of those notes that resembled what she was looking at now. "I don't buy it," she said, setting the folder down without opening it, the words alone carrying more weight than any page inside. "I've coached Callaway for 3 weeks. She's meticulous. She corrects her own mistakes before I even see them. She doesn't need to cheat on a fitness evaluation she'd pass without trying." The athletic director, a tired-looking man named Frank Delacroix, who had held the job for 2 decades and had learned, in that time, exactly which battles were worth fighting and which ones cost more than they were worth, rubbed his eyes. "Diane, I hear you," he said. "But the pages were found in her bag. That's not nothing. And with the Sterling family's history with this program, I don't have the luxury of letting this slide without a formal review. You know how this works." "I know how it looks," Coach Marsh said. "I don't know that it's true." "Then let the hearing sort that out," Delacroix said, not unkindly, but firmly, the way a man says something he has said too many times before to still feel good about it. "That's what it's there for." Coach Marsh left his office unsatisfied, the folder still tucked under her arm, and walked the long way back across the darkening quad, turning the whole conversation over in her mind. She had learned a long time ago that being right and being believed were not always the same thing, especially in a place where certain last names carried more weight than certain truths. She thought of the way Joe had looked at her in that first meeting, steady, controlled, entirely without the panic a guilty person usually could not help but show. She thought of the way Joe had caught Paige out of the air weeks earlier, trained reflexes moving faster than fear. Whatever was happening here, Coach Marsh was increasingly certain it had very little to do with a fitness evaluation, and everything to do with a boy who did not like being told no. She did not yet have proof of that either. But she was patient. She had been patient for 11 years, watching young athletes grow into themselves. And she understood, in the particular way coaches understand timing, that sometimes the right move was simply to wait for the moment when proof finally arrived. News of the suspension moved through the squad fast, and predictably, it moved through campus faster. By the next morning, half the dining hall was repeating some version of the story, most of it wrong, most of it worse than the truth. Paige found Joe outside the library that afternoon, her face pale with worry. "They're saying you cheated," Paige said, breathless, like she had run the whole way. "That's not true. I know that's not true." "It's not true," Joe confirmed. "Then why would they even think that? Why would anyone put something like that in your bag?" Joe did not answer right away. She was watching, over Paige's shoulder, a familiar figure crossing the quad at a distance, Grant Sterling walking beside Wade Holloway, both of them laughing at something, neither of them so much as glancing in her direction. That itself told her something. Guilty men rarely look away that easily. Only men who have already convinced themselves they will never be caught can afford not to look. "I think I know why," Joe said quietly. "I just don't have proof yet." "What do? "We wait," Joe said, echoing Coach Marsh, though the word tasted different in her own mouth, heavier. "And we watch." Paige nodded, though her eyes were still wet, still frightened in a way that had nothing to do with fitness evaluations or locker rooms. She had grown close to Joe faster than she had grown close to almost anyone else at Ashford. And watching her friend get dragged through campus gossip for something she clearly had not done left a helpless, angry feeling in her chest that she did not know what to do with. She would find out, sooner than she wanted to, exactly what that helplessness could turn into if left unchecked. That night, back in the quiet of her own room, Joe took out the small dollar store notebook and sat cross-legged on her bed, the lamp casting a warm circle of light across the blank page. She wrote the date at the top, then the time, then a short, factual account of everything Coach Marsh had told her that afternoon. She did not editorialize. She did not write down how frightened or angry she felt underneath it all. Her father had taught her that too, a long time ago, watching over her shoulder as a much younger version of her practiced the same habit at their kitchen table. "Facts hold up," he used to say. "Feelings fade and twist with time. Write down the facts and let the feelings live somewhere else." She closed the notebook, set it back inside her bag beside that sealed envelope she still had not found the courage to open, and turned off the lamp, though sleep did not come easily that night. 3 days later, on a gray Thursday afternoon, Paige left the library later than usual, alone, cutting through a narrow breezeway between two academic buildings that most students used as a shortcut back toward the dorms. Wade Holloway was waiting there, not by accident. He stepped into her path, blocking the narrow walkway, Cole Ashby a few steps behind him, hanging back the way he always hung back, letting Wade do the talking. "You're friends with the new girl," Wade said. It was not a question. Paige's heart began to pound, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "Joe. Her name is Joe." "Whatever her name is," Wade said, stepping closer, "you might want to tell her to keep her mouth shut. About the evaluation thing, about whatever she thinks she knows." "She didn't do anything," Paige said, her voice shaking now despite her best effort to hold it steady. "You know she didn't." Something shifted in Wade's face, a flicker of anger that had been simmering for days, looking for somewhere to land. "You don't want to be involved in this," he said, and he reached out, not violently, not at first, just a hand closing around her upper arm, gripping harder than a warning needed to grip. "Understand? Let go of me," Paige said, trying to pull back. He did not let go right away. He held on a beat too long, hard enough that Paige gasped, hard enough that when he finally released her, stepping back with a short, humorless laugh, red marks bloomed across her skin where his fingers had been, and a sharp, hot pain ran up through her wrist where she had twisted trying to pull free. "Just relay the message," Wade said, and he and Cole walked off, laughing about something else already already moving on to whatever came next in their afternoon, leaving Paige standing alone in the breezeway, cradling her wrist shaking. She did not go to Joe right away. She was too frightened, too embarrassed, too unsure what would happen if she said anything out loud. She went instead to her own dorm room, wrapped her wrist in a bag of ice from the hall freezer, and sat on her bed crying quietly for a long while before she finally worked up the courage to text Joe 3 words. "Can you come?" Joe was there in 11 minutes. She did not raise her voice when Paige told her what happened. She did not ask a dozen frantic questions. She sat down beside Paige on the bed, examined the bruising forming along her forearm with the careful, practiced attention of someone who had been taught, a long time ago, exactly how to check for real injury under stress, and asked only the questions that mattered. "Does it hurt when you move your wrist like this?" "A little. Can you make a fist?" Paige tried, wincing. "Yeah, it just aches." "Okay," Joe said. "It's probably not broken. We'll get you to the health center tomorrow to be sure. For tonight, keep the ice on it, 20 minutes at a time." True to her word, Joe walked Paige to the campus health center the following morning before their first class, waiting through the whole appointment in the small lobby with its outdated magazines and quiet, humming fluorescent lights. The doctor confirmed what Joe had already suspected, a sprain, not a break, though the bruising along Paige's forearm would take a week or 2 to fully fade. "Do you want to report what happened?" the doctor asked gently, once the wrap had been fitted around Paige's wrist. "We can connect you with campus security if you'd like to file something." Paige glanced at Joe, uncertain, and Joe gave the smallest nod, not pushing, simply letting her know the choice was hers to make. "Not yet," Paige said quietly. "I'm not ready yet." "That's all right," the doctor said. "The option stays open whenever you are." They walked back across campus together afterward, slower than usual, Paige cradling her wrapped wrist against her chest, and Joe matching her pace without comment, the way you walk beside someone who needs the world to slow down for a while. "I'm scared to go back to that breezeway," Paige admitted, somewhere around the halfway point. "Then don't go that way alone," Joe said simply. "Take the long way, or text me, and I'll walk with you." "You can't walk me everywhere, Joe. I can walk you most places," Joe said. And something in her voice, quiet and certain, made Paige laugh despite everything. A small, surprised laugh that eased some of the tightness in her chest for the first time in 2 days. Her voice was calm the entire time, steady, almost clinical. It was only after Paige had settled, only after the immediate fear had eased from the room, that something in Joe's face changed, something that had nothing to do with calm at all. It was very quiet, whatever it was. But it was there. "I'm sorry this happened because of me," Joe said finally. "It's not your fault," Paige said quickly. "It's theirs, all of it." Joe did not answer right away. She sat with that for a long moment, her jaw tight, her hands very still in her lap. She thought of her father again, the way she often did in moments that mattered most. She thought of the mornings on the mat, the quiet lessons that had never once been about winning. Fighting is not about winning. It is about not losing something you can't get back. She understood, sitting there beside her frightened friend, exactly what he had meant all those years ago, in a way she had never fully understood it before. There were things worth protecting, and there was a moment, sometimes, when protecting them stopped being a choice and became simply the only thing left to do. She was not there yet, not entirely. But she was closer than she had been that morning. Later that same week, Joe found herself walking past the athletic complex, just as the evening shift of maintenance staff was locking up for the night. Earl Whitcomb was there, coiling an extension cord near the loading dock, the fluorescent lights overhead humming faintly in the quiet. He looked up as she passed, and something in his face told her he had been waiting, in some quiet way, for this exact moment. "You got a minute?" he asked. Joe stopped. "Sure." He set the cord down, wiping his hands on his work pants, and studied her for a moment before speaking, the way a man studies something he has waited a long time to finally say out loud. "Your last name," he said. "Calloway. Your father, was his name Daniel?" Joe went very still. "Yes," she said carefully. "How did you know that?" Earl let out a long breath, the kind that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than his lungs. "I served with him," he said. "A long time ago, Fort Benning mostly, combatives training. Your father taught half the soldiers who came through that program how to fall, how to move, how to stay calm when things went sideways. Including me." Joe's eyes filled fast, unexpectedly, before she could stop them. She blinked hard, embarrassed. But Earl did not look away, did not make her feel foolish for it. "You're the one that showed me how to catch a falling body without breaking either of you," she said quietly. half to herself, remembering the gym floor, the way her body had moved before her mind caught up. That was him. He taught me that when I was 13. I know, Earl said. I saw it in the gym that day, recognized it before I even knew it was you doing it. They stood there a moment, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound between them. Why didn't you say something sooner? Joe asked. Earl looked down at his hands for a moment before answering. Because I wasn't sure it was right, saying it, he admitted. I didn't come to Ashford by accident, Joe. I want you to understand that. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. About 3 years ago, right before your father's last deployment, we talked, just the two of us, at a diner outside base, the night before he shipped out. He was worried, not about himself, about you, about what would happen to you if something happened to him. Joe's breath caught. He asked me for a favor, Earl continued. Told me you'd be starting college in a few years, told me the name of the school he hoped you'd end up at if things worked out. Asked me if I'd consider retiring somewhere close, keeping an eye out, quiet-like, not hovering, just being nearby in case you ever needed someone who understood where you came from. You did that, Joe said, her voice barely above a whisper. You moved here for that. I took the maintenance job here 2 years ago, Earl said. Wasn't hard. I needed something to do with my hands anyway, after I retired out. And I figured, if I was going to keep a promise to a man like your father, I was going to keep it properly. Not make a big show of it. Just be here. Joe did not know what to say for a long moment. She had spent 3 years believing she was carrying her father's absence entirely alone, that whatever he had left behind for her existed only in a wooden box of dog tags and a sealed envelope she had not yet found the courage to open. She had not known there was a promise walking around campus in old work boots, pushing a mop, waiting patiently for the right moment to introduce itself. Thank you, she said finally, because there did not seem to be a bigger word available that fit. Don't thank me yet, Earl said, and something in his voice sharpened slightly, businesslike now, the tone of a man used to briefing soldiers before a difficult task. I've been hearing things around this school, about that quarterback and his friends, about what happened with your gym bag, about what happened to your friend's arm this week. He shook his head slowly. I've kept my distance because that's what your father asked of me. Quiet, not hovering. But I'm not going to stand here and watch this get worse without stepping in when it counts. What do you mean? I mean, Earl said, when the time comes that you need someone to vouch for what kind of person your father was, and what kind of training you actually have, I'll be there. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you it's already decided. Joe felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been wound tight for 3 long years. He'd be glad you kept that promise, she said quietly. Earl's eyes were bright for a moment, though he blinked it away quickly, the way men of his generation often did, clearing his throat instead of letting the moment sit too long in the open. Get home safe, he said. And Joe, keep writing things down. Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it. She almost asked how he knew about the notebook. Then she remembered who had taught her to keep one in the first place, and understood that some habits simply run in families, passed down quietly, the way this whole promise had been passed down, one careful hand to another. That same week, in a dorm room 3 floors up, Nora Bennett was pursuing a very different kind of investigation. She had not stopped thinking about the sealed letter at the bottom of Joe's bag, nor about the strange, careful way people around campus had begun treating Joe since the cheating accusation broke. Something about the timing bothered her. The suspension had come not long after the gym floor incident, not long after Joe had, without meaning to, impressed half the campus in a way that seemed to sit badly with certain people. Nora did not believe in coincidences. Her mother had taught her that too, alongside the newspapers. She started small. She talked to a friend on the volleyball team, casually, over lunch, and learned that the shared locker room had been left unattended during Tuesday's practice, the exact afternoon before the pages were found. She talked to another friend who worked part-time in the campus security office, filing paperwork 3 afternoons a week, and asked, as casually as she could manage, whether the hallway and locker room cameras had picked up anything unusual that day. The answer surprised her. Yes, actually, there had been footage, a grainy angle covering the locker room entrance, time-stamped, showing someone entering during the empty practice window. But by the time Nora asked, the footage had already been flagged for deletion as part of routine monthly storage clearing, standard procedure. Nothing suspicious about the timing on paper, except that Nora's instincts told her otherwise. She could not access it herself. She was not staff. But her friend, a sophomore named Delia who worked the security desk, mentioned, almost in passing, that the automatic deletion was not scheduled to run until the following Monday. That gave Nora 4 days. She spent 2 of them working up the courage to ask Delia for a favor that could, if discovered, get them both in serious trouble. She spent the 3rd day deciding it was worth the risk anyway. On the 4th day, a quiet Sunday evening when the security office was mostly empty, Delia let her sit at the terminal for exactly 6 minutes, just long enough to pull up the relevant clip and save a copy to a small personal drive Nora had brought specifically for that purpose. The footage was grainy, distant, shot from an angle that showed the locker room door but not the interior. It showed a figure entering during the empty window, staying just under 4 minutes, then leaving. The face was not clearly visible, not at this resolution, not without better equipment than Nora currently had access to. But it was something. It was proof that someone had been in that locker room during the exact window Joe's bag had been tampered with. Someone who was very clearly not scheduled to be there. Someone whose build, even in the grainy footage, did not match anyone on the volleyball or cheer roster. Nora did not show it to Joe right away. She did not want to raise hope over something incomplete, something that might not hold up to real scrutiny yet. She saved the file in 3 separate places: the personal drive, a folder on her laptop, and, for good measure, a backup uploaded quietly to her university email account, the way her mother had taught her to always protect a source before you ever thought about using it. She had a feeling, sitting there in the empty security office with the small drive warm in her palm, that she was holding something that would matter a great deal, very soon. She was right. By the following Monday, Joe's suspension had escalated. What began as a routine review by Coach Marsh's department had, through channels neither Joe nor Coach Marsh fully understood, been pushed upward to the Dean of Students' office. Preston Sterling had made 2 phone calls that weekend, calls he would later describe, if ever asked, as simply checking in on his son's well-being during a stressful week. Both calls happened to land on the desk of Dean Harold Ingram, a careful, cautious administrator who had learned, over many years at Ashford, that certain names on the phone required a certain kind of attention. Dean Ingram called Joe into his office on Tuesday afternoon. He was not unkind, exactly, but he was formal, careful with his words in the particular way of a man protecting more than one interest at once. "Miss Calloway," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "I want to be clear that nothing has been decided yet, but given the seriousness of the allegation, and given some additional concerns that have been raised about your conduct this semester, the university feels it's necessary to move this to a formal hearing." "What additional concerns?" Joe asked evenly. Dean Ingram glanced briefly at a folder on his desk before answering, and Joe noticed, though she said nothing, that the folder looked thinner than a semester's worth of real concerns should look. "There have been some questions raised about the accuracy of information on your financial aid application," he said. "I want to stress that this is simply part of a routine review process." Joe felt something cold settle in her stomach, recognizing immediately the rumor she had refused to dignify with a response earlier, apparently now dressed up in official language and given a seat at the table. "That information is accurate," she said. "My father's death benefits and my survivor's pension are public record. You're welcome to verify them." "We intend to," Dean Ingram said. "As I said, routine." "When is the hearing?" Joe asked. Dean Ingram checked a calendar on his desk. "Friday, 6 o'clock in the evening. The boardroom in the administration building." He paused, studying her for a moment, something almost apologetic crossing his face, though he did not let it linger. "I'd encourage you to bring anything you feel is relevant to your case. Character references, documentation, anything that might help clarify the situation." Joe nodded once, the same careful, controlled nod she had given Coach Marsh weeks earlier, the nod that revealed nothing of the storm settling underneath it. "I'll be there," she said. She rose to leave, and had nearly reached the door when Dean Ingram spoke again, quieter this time, almost as though the words had escaped him before he could decide whether to say them. "For what it's worth, Miss Calloway," he said, "I've read your file, your grades, your record from before you arrived here. None of it looks like someone who needs to cut corners." He hesitated, glancing briefly toward his own desk phone, the one that had carried 2 calls that weekend from a name he did not particularly enjoy hearing. "I hope Friday clears things up. I truly do." It was not much. It was not an apology, and it was not protection, but it was honest, in a building where honesty had grown thin over the past 2 weeks. And Joe carried it with her out into the hallway, filing it away alongside everything else she was learning to notice. She walked out of that office with 4 days standing between her and a hearing that could end her time at Ashford before it had really begun. A hearing built on a lie planted by someone who had never once had to face real consequences for anything in his life. She did not go back to her dorm right away. She walked instead toward the football field, where afternoon practice was already underway. Players running drills under Coach Reyes's watchful eye. Whistles cutting through the September air. She found Grant near the sideline, toweling sweat from his neck, laughing at something Wade had said. He noticed her approaching before Wade did, and something in his posture shifted. A flicker of surprise quickly smoothed over into his usual easy smile. "Ohio," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." Joe stopped a few feet away, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to make clear she had not come to shout. "Paige has bruises on her arm," she said, "from your friend." Grant's smile faltered, just slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Joe said, her voice level, unhurried. "I don't have proof yet, but I will." "Is that a threat?" Wade said, stepping closer, some of his earlier smugness curdling into something harder. "No," Joe said, and she looked at Grant when she said it, not Wade, because she understood, in the way her father had taught her to understand things, exactly who was really in charge of what happened next. "It's a fact. You can laugh at me, you can spread whatever you want about my family. I've let that go because it cost me nothing real." She paused, and something in her voice shifted, quiet and absolute. "But when you touch someone who can't protect themselves, that ends here." The field around them had gone quieter. A few nearby players slowing their drills to listen. The way people always slow down when they sense something is about to break open. Grant recovered his smile, though it did not sit quite as easily on his face this time. "Big words," he said, "for someone about to get thrown out of school on Friday." "We'll see," Joe said, and she turned and walked away, unhurried, the same way she had walked away from him weeks earlier on this same field, leaving behind a silence that this time did not feel quite as certain of itself as it once had. That evening, back in her dorm room, Joe finally told Nora everything. The suspension, the manufactured concerns about her financial aid, the hearing scheduled for Friday at 6 o'clock. Nora listened without interrupting, and when Joe finished, she was quiet for a long moment, weighing something in her mind. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out the small personal drive she had kept hidden there for 4 days, turning it once in her fingers before setting it down on the desk between them. "I think I might have something," she said carefully. "It's not complete, it's not enough on its own, but I think it might be a start." Joe looked at the drive, then up at Nora, a question forming in her eyes. "What is it?" "Footage," Nora said, "from the day your bag was tampered with. I need a few more days to see if I can clean it up. Maybe get someone in my department to help identify who's in it properly." "But Joe," she met her roommate's eyes steadily, "I don't think you did this. I never thought you did. And I think by Friday we might actually be able to prove it." Outside their window, the Ashford campus settled into another ordinary evening, porch lights flickering on, the distant sound of the marching band rehearsing near the stadium, entirely unaware of the small, quiet drive sitting on a desk in room 214, or the 4 days now counting down toward a hearing that would decide far more than anyone in that administration building yet understood. Joe picked up the drive, turned it once in her hand the way Nora had, and set it carefully back down. "Friday," she said quietly, more to herself than to Nora. "Okay." She thought of her father's letter, still sealed, still waiting at the bottom of her bag. She was not ready to open it yet. Not yet. But for the first time since arriving at Ashford, she found herself wondering, with a quiet, steady certainty settling into her chest, whether Friday might be the day she finally understood what he had wanted her to know when the time came. 4 days, a sealed letter, a hidden drive, an old soldier's promise, finally spoken aloud after 3 long years of silence. Ashford State had no idea what was coming. It would find out soon enough. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a small campus in the days before something is about to break open, though almost nobody walking through it ever notices at the time. Classes still met. Trays still clattered in the dining hall. The marching band still rehearsed near the stadium each evening, preparing for a homecoming still more than a week away. But underneath that ordinary rhythm, 4 separate people were quietly getting ready for Friday in 4 separate ways. Coach Marsh spent her evenings compiling a written statement of her own, 3 weeks of practice notes laid out in careful, professional language, describing exactly what she had observed of Joe Calloway's character and conduct since the semester began. She did not know yet whether the hearing board would even allow her to read it aloud. She intended to bring it anyway. Earl Whitcombs spent one evening at his kitchen table, drafting by hand, on a legal pad, an account of his own service alongside Daniel Calloway, and of the promise made at a diner outside Fort Benning 3 years earlier. He was not a man who enjoyed public speaking. He had spent much of his career avoiding rooms full of officers whenever possible. But he folded the legal pad into his jacket pocket that Friday morning anyway, because some promises, once remembered, do not leave a man much choice in the matter. Nora spent every spare hour she had working with a friend from the journalism department who had a working knowledge of basic video enhancement software, running the grainy locker room footage through filter after filter, trying to coax a clearer image out of 4 minutes of low-resolution security video. Progress was slow. By Thursday night, she had something better than what she started with, though still not quite good enough, not yet, to settle the matter beyond doubt. And Joe spent those 4 days doing what she had always done best. She went to class. She wrote in her notebook. She sat with Paige each evening, walking her the long way back to the dorms. And she carried, everywhere she went, the sealed envelope from her father, tucked now inside her jacket instead of buried at the bottom of her bag, closer to her now than it had been in weeks, though she still had not opened it. She was saving it, without fully admitting to herself why, for the moment she suspected was coming. The moment her father had told her, all those years ago, she would simply know when it arrived. Friday was 4 days away. Somewhere on the other side of it waited a hearing room, a folded legal pad, an enhanced video file, a coach's written statement, and a decision that would determine far more than whether one freshman got to keep her place on a cheerleading squad. It would determine what kind of school Ashford State actually was, underneath all its banners and boosters and easy assumptions. Ashford did not know that yet, but it was about to find out. Friday arrived the way important days often do, dressed as an ordinary one. The sky over Ashford was a flat, colorless gray, the kind of sky that makes no promises either way. Classes met on schedule. The dining hall served the same food it always served on Fridays. Nobody walking across the quad that morning would have guessed that by 6 o'clock that evening, the whole shape of the semester would have changed. Joe woke early, before her alarm, and lay still for a while, staring at the ceiling of room 214. Nora was already awake across the room, sitting up in bed with her laptop open, dark circles under her eyes from 3 straight nights of barely sleeping. "How's it look?" Joe asked quietly. Nora turned the laptop slightly so Joe could see the screen. The footage was better now. Not perfect, but better. A figure entering the locker room, staying just under 4 minutes, leaving again. The face was still not fully clear, not clear enough to hold up entirely on its own. But the build, the walk, the particular way this person moved through the doorway, all of it was distinct enough now that someone who knew the football team well might recognize it. "It's not a smoking gun," Nora admitted, "but it's something. Combined with everything else, it might be enough." Joe studied the screen for a long moment. "It's him," she said quietly. "Cole, not Grant. Grant wouldn't do it himself. He'd have somebody else do it for him." "I think you're right," Nora said. "I can't prove it's him specifically, not with certainty. But I can prove somebody who isn't on the volleyball or cheer roster was in that locker room during the exact window your bag was tampered with. That's not nothing, Joe. That's reasonable doubt, at minimum." Joe nodded slowly, filing the thought away the way she filed everything now, careful, unhurried. She dressed for classes that morning the same as any other day, though every motion felt slightly heavier, weighted by the 6 o'clock hour, waiting somewhere ahead of her like a stone sitting at the bottom of a still pond. She went to her classes. She sat through a history lecture without absorbing a single word of it. She ate lunch across from Paige, who reached over at one point and squeezed her hand without saying anything, because sometimes there is nothing useful to say. And the squeeze says it better anyway. It was there in the dining hall over lunch that Grant found her. He crossed the room with Wade and Cole a step behind him, the old formation, and stopped at the end of her table, loud enough that half the room turned to look, the way half the room always turned to look when Grant Sterling wanted an audience. "Big night for you," he said, a hard, brittle edge under the usual charm. "No witnesses, no proof. Just you standing up there telling everyone I planted something I never planted." He shook his head, almost theatrical about it. "You really thought this through, huh, Ohio?" Joe did not answer right away. She simply watched him, the way she had learned to watch things that wanted a reaction and did not deserve one. That silence, more than anything she could have said, seemed to be exactly what pushed him past whatever thin control he still had left. He reached across the table, fast, before Paige could pull back, and hooked 2 fingers under the chain at Joe's collar for the second time that semester. This time the clasp had already been repaired once, and it held a moment longer than it had the first time, long enough for Joe to catch his wrist, briefly, without force, just enough resistance to make him work for it. He pulled harder. The chain gave. He held the tags up for the room to see, the same way he had on the football field weeks earlier, and then, without breaking eye contact with her, dropped them into a nearby trash bin, the metal clinking softly against the plastic liner. "See you at 6, he said, and walked away, Wade and Cole trailing him toward the exit, a ripple of stunned, uncomfortable silence spreading through the dining hall in their wake. Paige was already on her feet, but Joe reached the bin first, calm, unhurried, retrieving the tags from among the wrappers and half-eaten trays with the same quiet care she had shown the very first time, weeks ago, on the football field. "I'm getting really tired of watching him do that to you," Paige said, her voice shaking with anger now instead of fear. "Me too," Joe said, and something in her voice, steady but sharpened at the edges, suggested that whatever patience she had been drawing on all semester was finally running close to its bottom. She slipped the chain into her jacket pocket rather than putting it back around her neck, close to the letter already resting there. Not much longer now. By 4 o'clock, she was back in her room, and it was there, sitting alone while Nora finished her last class of the day, that Joe finally reached into her jacket and pulled out the sealed envelope she had been carrying against her chest for 4 days. She turned it over in her hands, her name in her father's handwriting. The same handwriting from birthday cards, from notes left on the kitchen counter, from 100 small, ordinary moments she had not known at the time to hold on to more tightly. She thought of what he had told her the last time she saw him, standing in the driveway of their small house, his duffel bag already loaded into the car. "Don't open it unless you really need to. You'll know when it's time." She did not know with certainty whether this counted as that time, but something in her chest told her it was close enough. Close enough that waiting any longer felt like its own kind of cowardice, and her father had never once, in 18 years, taught her to be a coward about anything. She broke the seal carefully, the old paper crackling softly in the quiet room, and unfolded 2 pages of handwriting, some of it a little rushed in places, the handwriting of a man writing quickly the night before a deployment, trying to fit everything that mattered into a space too small to hold it all. "Joe, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to say it to you myself. And that's the hardest sentence I've ever had to write. I'm sorry for that. I hope, wherever you are when you read this, you're not too angry with me for it. I did what I believed I had to do, and I hope someday you understand that better than I could ever explain it in a letter. I don't know what's happening in your life right now, whatever moment made you finally open this. Knowing you, it's probably something you've been trying to handle on your own, quietly, the way I taught you to handle most things. I want you to know that's all right, but I also want you to know it's all right to let people help you too. Strength isn't only carrying weight by yourself. Sometimes it's letting somebody else carry a little of it with you. I taught you how to fall without breaking, how to read a room before it turns dangerous, how to stay calm when everything in you wants to scream. I taught you all of that because the world isn't always fair, and I wasn't always going to be there to stand between you and the parts of it that aren't. I needed you to be able to stand there yourself, but I never once taught you those things so you could win a fight. I taught them to you so you'd never have to be afraid of one. There's a difference, and I think, if you're the kind of person I raised you to be, you already understand it better than most grown men I served with. Whatever is happening, whoever is testing you right now, remember this. You don't have to prove anything to people who already decided not to see you clearly. You only have to stay exactly who you are. That has always been more than enough. It certainly was for me. I love you more than any of these words can hold. I'm proud of you in a way I never found the right sentence for, while I was there to say it out loud. I'm sorry for that too. Stand tall, breathe slow. You already know how to do the rest. Dad Joe sat with the letter in her lap for a long while after she finished reading it, tears falling freely now, though her breathing stayed steady, controlled, the way he had taught her. It was not the letter she had expected, not exactly. She had half imagined, somewhere in the back of her mind these past 3 years, that it might contain some final piece of practical instruction, some last lesson meant for exactly this kind of moment. It contained something better than that. It contained him, his voice, steady and warm, exactly as she remembered it, telling her the one thing she had needed to hear without fully realizing she needed it. She folded the letter carefully back along its original creases. And for the first time since Ashford began testing her, she did not feel like she was carrying this alone. When Nora came back to the room 20 minutes later, she found Joe sitting quietly on her bed, the letter held gently in both hands. Her eyes red, but her posture straighter than Nora had ever seen it. "You opened it," Nora said softly. "Yeah," Joe said. "I think it was time. Are you okay?" Joe looked up and something in her face had shifted, some final piece settling into place. "I think I am," she said. "I think I'm ready for tonight." The boardroom in the administration building was smaller than Joe had imagined. A long wooden table surrounded by high-backed chairs, portraits of former university presidents lining the walls in heavy gilt frames. Dean Ingram sat at the head of the table, flanked by two members of the Athletic Conduct Board, a professor from the Education Department, and a retired judge who volunteered her time to the university twice a semester for exactly this kind of proceeding. Joe arrived 10 minutes early with Coach Marsh beside her, carrying her folder of written statements. Earl Whitcomb arrived shortly after, dressed in a pressed shirt Joe had never seen him wear before, the legal pad folded carefully in his jacket pocket. Nora slipped in a few minutes later, laptop bag over one shoulder, taking a seat in the small gallery of chairs reserved for observers along the back wall. Grant Sterling arrived with his father. Preston Sterling walked in like a man entering a restaurant where the staff already knew his order, nodding to Dean Ingram with the easy familiarity of two people who had shared more than one Rotary lunch together. He took a seat beside Grant near the front, setting a leather folder of his own on the table. Though Joe noticed, he did not open it right away. Wade Holloway and Cole Ashby were both present as well, seated a few rows back, called as witnesses to speak to their knowledge of the situation. Cole would not meet Joe's eyes when she glanced his way. Wade met them easily enough, chin lifted, unbothered. Dean Ingram called the meeting to order at exactly 6 o'clock. Before the hearing moved to its central allegation, he invited Coach Marsh to read a brief statement into the record, a courtesy she had specifically requested days earlier. She rose, opened her folder, and read through 3 weeks of careful, dated observations, describing Joe's discipline, her precision, her consistent calm under pressure, the kind of pattern she noted that rarely accompanies dishonesty. "In 11 years of coaching this program," she said, closing the folder, "I have learned to trust what I see on the practice floor more than what I hear in gossip. What I have seen from Miss Calloway does not match what she stands accused of tonight." She sat back down. Dean Ingram thanked her, noted the statement for the record, and continued. "This hearing concerns an allegation of academic dishonesty against Miss Josephine Calloway." He began, reading from a prepared statement related to materials found in her possession that appeared to be unauthorized access to the answer key for the athletic department's fitness evaluation. He laid out the basic facts as they had been reported, careful and neutral in his tone, and then turned the floor over first to Joe. Joe stood, steadier than she had expected to feel. She did not have a prepared speech. She had never needed one in the way people who tell the truth rarely do. "I didn't put those pages in my bag," she said simply. "I've never seen the real evaluation. I wouldn't need to cheat on it, and even if I wanted to, I wouldn't know where to begin finding an actual answer key. What I do have is a reason to believe I know how those pages got there, and why." She glanced briefly toward Grant, then continued, her voice level. 3 weeks ago, on the football field, in front of nearly 40 witnesses, Grant Sterling took something that belonged to my late father and threw it on the ground. I didn't retaliate. I picked it up and walked away. Since then, there's been a rumor campaign about my family, questions raised about my financial aid, and this week, my friend Paige Ferris was physically threatened and injured by Wade Holloway in a breezeway near the library for the crime of being my friend. A murmur moved through the room. Preston Sterling's jaw tightened, though he said nothing yet. "I have no proof that Grant personally placed those pages in my bag," Joe continued. "But I have a security clip showing that someone who does not belong to either the volleyball or cheer roster entered that locker room during the exact window it happened. I'd like that entered into consideration." Dean Ingram glanced toward Nora, who rose and connected her laptop to the room's small projector with hands that were not quite steady, though her voice was clear when she spoke. "I obtained this footage through a friend who works in the security office. Before it was scheduled for routine deletion," she said. "I want to be transparent about that process, because I know it wasn't standard procedure. But I believed, and still believe, that it was relevant evidence at risk of being lost. The footage played on the small screen at the front of the room, grainy but unmistakable in its basic outline. A figure entering, staying briefly, leaving. The judge on the board leaned forward, studying it closely. "Can anyone identify this individual with certainty?" she asked. The room was quiet for a long moment. It was Wade Holloway, of all people, who broke it, and not in the way anyone expected. He had been sitting rigid in his chair since the video started playing, his earlier confidence draining slowly from his face as the footage looped a second time. Something in him, watching Cole's familiar walk on that grainy screen, cracked under the weight of a decision he had clearly not made peace with carrying alone. "That's Cole," he said abruptly before he had fully decided to say it out loud. "That's him. I was there when he did it." Grant told him to. The room erupted into quiet, urgent noise, Dean Ingram calling for order, Preston Sterling half rising from his chair before catching himself, Grant's face going pale beside his father. "Wade," Grant hissed, low and furious. "I'm not going down for this," Wade said, his voice rising now, some dam finally breaking after weeks of pressure. "I threatened that girl in the breezeway because you told me to. I'm not sitting here while everyone acts like I planned any of this. It was your idea, Grant. All of it. From the field." Cole Ashby, several seats away, had gone very still, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. Dean Ingram called for a brief recess to restore order. And it was during that recess, while the room buzzed with lowered voices and the board members conferred quietly among themselves, that Earl Whitcomb rose from his seat and asked formally to be heard. "I'm not on the witness list," he said to Dean Ingram, "but I believe what I have to say is relevant, and I'd ask the board's patience for a few minutes." Dean Ingram, still visibly shaken by the last several minutes, nodded permission. Earl stood at the front of the room, the legal pad open in his weathered hands. Though he barely glanced down at it, the words clearly ones he had carried inside himself far longer than the 4 days since he'd written them down. "My name is Earl Whitcomb," he said. "I work maintenance here at Ashford State. Before that, I served 22 years in the United States Army. I retired as a command sergeant major." He paused, letting that settle. "I want to talk about Miss Calloway's father." The room grew very quiet. "Daniel Calloway was a master sergeant," Earl continued. "He spent the better part of his career training soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, close-quarters defense, the kind of skills that save lives when things go wrong fast, and there's no time to think. He trained me at Fort Benning more years ago than I care to count exactly. He was, without question, one of the finest instructors I ever served under. Calm under pressure in a way that made the rest of us calmer just standing near him." He looked for a moment directly at Joe, something warm passing between them. "He was killed 3 years ago during an overseas deployment, doing exactly what he always did, looking out for the people around him." Earl's voice caught, briefly, before steadying again. "Before he shipped out that last time, he asked me for a favor. Asked me to keep an eye on his daughter, quietly, if she ever ended up at a school near where I planned to retire. I didn't take that request lightly. I moved here 2 years ago in part to keep that promise." He set the legal pad down on the table. "I'm telling you this because I've watched this young woman since she arrived on this campus, and everything I've seen from her matches exactly the character her father raised her to have. Patience, restraint, a refusal to strike first, even when struck. That's not weakness, whatever some folks in this town might have assumed watching from the sideline. That's discipline most grown men never manage to learn." He looked around the room slowly, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. "I'd ask you to weigh that, alongside everything else you've heard tonight." The room was silent when he finished, the particular silence that follows something true being spoken plainly, without embellishment, in a place that badly needed to hear it. It was into that silence that a new voice entered, unexpected, arriving through the small speaker of a laptop Nora had set up earlier at the request of the board, connected by video call to a witness who had asked, weeks earlier through a mutual acquaintance of Nora's, to be allowed to speak if the situation ever called for it. The screen showed a young woman, perhaps 22, sitting in what looked like a small apartment somewhere out of state. Her name, she explained, was Hannah Doyle, a former Ashford student who had transferred out 2 years earlier, midway through her sophomore year. "I saw the notice about tonight's hearing through a friend still enrolled here," she said, her voice steady but clearly costing her something to keep that way. "I wanted to say something because I don't think what's happening to Joe Calloway is new. I think it's happened before. It happened to me." She described carefully a pattern from 2 years earlier, Grant Sterling's freshman year, remarkably similar in shape to what Joe had endured these past weeks. An early conflict, escalating rumors, a fabricated academic violation that nearly ended her scholarship, and, in her case, a quiet, unofficial phone call from Preston Sterling to the dean's office at the time. A substantial and sudden donation to the athletic department's new facilities fund, arriving within the same week the allegations against her were mysteriously dropped without explanation. "I left the following semester," Hannah said, "not because I was forced to. Because I didn't feel safe here anymore, and nobody in a position to help seemed willing to look closely enough to understand why." Preston Sterling was on his feet now, his composed exterior finally cracking. "This is absurd," he said, his voice sharp. "Some kind of coordinated attack, dredging up ancient history that has nothing to do with tonight. Mr. Sterling," the retired judge on the board said calmly, "please sit down, or I'll have you removed from these proceedings." He sat, though his jaw remained tight, his composure visibly fraying at the edges for the first time anyone in that room had likely ever witnessed. Dean Ingram called for a longer recess after that, nearly 30 minutes, during which the board reviewed the video evidence, Coach Marsh's written statement, Wade's unplanned confession, Earl's testimony, and Hannah's account, weighing all of it together in a small side room while the rest of the party waited in tense, scattered silence. When the board returned, the retired judge spoke first, her voice carrying the particular weight of someone used to delivering difficult conclusions clearly. "Based on the evidence presented tonight," she said, "this board finds insufficient grounds to support the allegation of academic dishonesty against Miss Calloway. That matter is dismissed in full, effective immediately, with her suspension lifted and her standing with the cheer program fully restored." A small, quiet sound of relief passed through Coach Marsh, through Nora, through Jo herself, though her face remained composed, years of practice holding steady even now. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "given the evidence and testimony presented regarding Mr. Ashby's role in fabricating evidence, and Mr. Holloway's admitted role in threatening and injuring another student, and credible testimony suggesting a broader pattern involving Mr. Sterling and inappropriate institutional influence exercised on his behalf, this board is recommending a full independent review of both this incident and the incident described by Miss Doyle, with appropriate disciplinary action to follow for all students found responsible, up to and including dismissal from their respective athletic programs and further university sanctions." Dean Ingram, visibly relieved to finally be delivering something resembling justice after weeks of quiet institutional cowardice, added one final note. "This board will also be recommending a formal review of any donor influence on disciplinary proceedings at this university, past and present," he said, his eyes briefly meeting Preston Sterling's across the room. "Effective immediately." The hearing adjourned shortly after 7 o'clock. Jo walked out of that building into the cool evening air with Coach Marsh on one side and Earl on the other, Nora and Paige waiting just outside the doors, Paige rushing forward the moment she saw them to wrap Jo in a careful one-armed hug, mindful of her healing wrist. "You did it," Paige said, half laughing, half crying. "We did it," Jo corrected gently, glancing at each of them in turn. "All of us." For a few minutes, standing together outside the administration building in the cooling evening air, it felt almost like an ending. Coach Marsh squeezed Jo's shoulder before heading off to bring her car around. Earl lingered a moment longer, studying Jo with an expression somewhere between pride and something quieter, something closer to relief, 3 years in the making. "Your father would have liked tonight," he said simply. "He'd have liked all of you," Jo said. Standing there with me, Earl allowed himself a small smile, rare on his usually composed face, and reached out to shake her hand, formal and warm at once. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's a big day too, whether you're ready for it or not." Jo laughed softly, the first real laugh she had allowed herself in days. "I'll try. It should have ended there. In a fairer world, perhaps it would have." But Grant Sterling had never once, in his entire life, learned how to lose gracefully. And this particular loss, unfolding in front of his father, in front of witnesses, in front of the entire trajectory of a life that had always bent easily in whatever direction he pushed it, was more than his pride could absorb quietly. He waited until the small crowd outside the administration building had begun to thin, until Coach Marsh had gone to bring her car around, and Earl had stepped aside to speak quietly with Nora, until Jo and Paige stood alone for a moment near the edge of the parking lot, walking slowly toward the dormitories in the deepening dusk. He stepped out from between 2 parked cars, Wade and Cole flanking him, all 3 of their faces lit strangely by the sodium orange of the parking lot lights. "You think this is over," Grant said, his voice low and shaking with something that was no longer quite confidence. "You think you just get to walk away after what you did in there." "What I did," Joe said evenly, stepping slightly in front of Paige without seeming to think about it, "was tell the truth." "You ruined my life," Grant said, and there was something almost childlike underneath the fury in his voice, the sound of a boy encountering, for the first time, a consequence he could not talk or buy his way out of. "Everything my father built, everything I've worked for. You did that," Joe said quietly. "I just stopped covering for it." Wade stepped forward first, closing the distance faster than Paige could gasp a warning, reaching for Joe's shoulder with the same rough grip he had used on Paige days earlier. He never reached it. What happened next took less than 8 seconds, though everyone who witnessed it, and there were several students passing at a distance, phones already rising instinctively to capture what looked, from far away, like the beginning of something dangerous, would later describe it as feeling much longer, the way real danger always stretches time strangely in memory. Joe's body moved before her mind fully caught up, the way it always did now, years of quiet mornings on a wrestling mat finally meeting the moment they had been built for. She stepped sideways instead of back, redirecting Wade's outstretched arm past her rather than away from her, using his own forward momentum against him, sweeping his balance out from under him with a controlled motion of her hip and leg that put him flat on the pavement, breath knocked from his lungs. Before he understood what had happened, she did not strike him. She did not need to. Cole lunged next, more out of panic than any real plan, and Joe turned into him rather than away, catching his wrist as it swung toward her, twisting it with practiced, economical pressure that folded him forward at the waist, guiding him, controlled, down onto one knee beside Wade, a small, pained sound escaping him as his shoulder locked in a position that offered him exactly one choice: stay still or hurt himself further trying to fight it. Grant hesitated, just half a second, watching both his friends go down without a single closed fist thrown against them. And in that half second, Joe turned to face him fully, her breathing barely elevated, her stance loose and ready without looking aggressive at all. "You still have a chance to step back," she said, the same words she had spoken to him on the football field weeks earlier, though they landed entirely differently now, heavier, absolute. Grant did not step back. He lunged instead, swinging wide and clumsy, more emotion than technique behind it, and Joe simply was not where the swing expected her to be, slipping the angle with a small pivot of her hips, catching his extended arm, and using his own forward momentum to guide him, firmly but without cruelty, down onto the pavement beside his two friends, pinning his shoulder with careful, controlled pressure that held him completely still, without breaking anything at all. "Stay down," she said quietly, not shouting, not triumphant, simply stating a fact. "This is over." By the time campus security arrived, summoned by more than one phone call from students who had watched the confrontation unfold from a distance, all 3 young men were exactly where Joe had left them, immobilized without a single serious injury among them, bruised pride the deepest wound any of them carried away from that parking lot. Coach Marsh arrived moments later, having heard the commotion from across the lot, and found Joe standing calmly to one side, Paige beside her, both of them shaken but unhurt, while security officers helped Wade, Cole, and Grant to their feet, all 3 subdued in a way none of them had ever been subdued before. "What happened here?" the lead security officer asked, looking between the scene and Joe with obvious confusion. "They approached us," Joe said simply. "I defended myself and my friend. Nobody seriously hurt. I made sure of that." The security footage from the parking lot camera, reviewed later that night, confirmed every word of it, showing with perfect clarity exactly what several eyewitnesses had already described. 3 young men initiating contact, 1 young woman responding with controlled, restrained defense, never once escalating beyond what was necessary to protect herself and her friend. It would become, in the days that followed, one of the most watched pieces of security footage in Ashford State's history, passed quietly between students until administration finally released an official statement addressing it directly. The independent review recommended by the disciplinary board moved quickly once it began, propelled by evidence that had already by that point become difficult for anyone to ignore. Within 2 weeks, Cole Ashby was permanently dismissed from the football program and placed on academic probation for his role in fabricating evidence. Wade Holloway received the same dismissal, along with a formal disciplinary record for the assault on Paige Ferris, a record that would follow him well beyond his time at Ashford. Grant Sterling's case drew the most attention, and the harshest consequence. Beyond his dismissal from the football program, the university's review into Hannah Doyle's case 2 years earlier confirmed a clear pattern, corroborated by financial records showing the timing of the Sterling family's donations against the timing of dropped disciplinary matters involving Grant, stretching back further than even Hannah had known about. Preston Sterling resigned from the university's board of trustees before the review formally concluded, a resignation the university accepted without argument. The dealership signs across the county did not come down, but something in the way people in Ashford said the name Sterling changed after that. The automatic respect replaced by something more careful, more knowing. Grant himself was placed on academic and disciplinary probation, required to complete a lengthy period of community service, and a formal restorative justice process that included, among other requirements, a face-to-face conversation with Joe, mediated by university staff, in which he was asked to account fully for his actions and their impact. He did not handle it gracefully at first, but something in the weeks that followed, stripped of his father's protection for the first time in his life, forced to sit with real consequences instead of talking his way around them, began, slowly, to change something in him. It would take much longer than this single semester for that change to fully settle. But it began there, in a small office with a mediator present, Joe sitting across from him, calm and steady, offering him nothing more or less than the plain, unflinching truth of what he had done and what it had cost. "I don't need you to apologize to me," she told him near the end of that conversation. "I need you to understand that the way you treated Paige, the way you treated me, that's not who you have to keep being. That part's actually up to you now." He did not say much in response, but he did not argue either, and something in his face, for the first time since Joe had arrived at Ashford, looked genuinely uncertain rather than certain of his own importance. And uncertainty, for a young man who had never once had to sit with it before, was its own kind of beginning. Paige's recovery, in the days that followed, moved at its own gentler pace. The physical bruising along her arm faded within 2 weeks, exactly as the doctor had predicted, though the deeper unease took longer to settle. She started walking the long way around the breezeway out of habit rather than fear now. And by the second week, she had begun, quietly, sitting in on a support group the health center offered for students who had experienced harassment on campus, a step she credited when she finally mentioned it to Joe, to watching her friend refuse to let fear have the final say. "I used to think being brave meant not being scared," Paige told her one evening, the two of them walking back from practice under a sky just beginning to darken. "Now I think it just means doing the thing anyway." "That sounds about right," Joe said. Homecoming arrived the following evening, the Ashford Stadium filling early with families, alumni, students, and townspeople, the marching band's brass catching the last gold light of a clear autumn afternoon. It was, by long-standing tradition, also the evening of the university's annual Veterans Recognition Ceremony, held at midfield before kickoff, honoring alumni and family members of the campus community who had served, and those who had not returned. This year, for the first time, the ceremony included a new addition, proposed jointly by Coach Marsh, Dean Ingram, and Earl Whitcomb in the 2 weeks since the hearing, and approved unanimously by the university's Veterans Affairs Office. A small honor wall, newly installed near the stadium's main entrance, meant to display, permanently, the names and service records of community members connected to Ashford State who had given their lives in service to the country. Joe stood at midfield that evening in her cheer uniform, restored fully to the squad, Paige beside her, wrist finally free of its wrap. Nora stood near the sideline with her camera, capturing the moment for a feature story she had been asked, at Coach Marsh's suggestion, to write for the campus paper, the first real byline of her college career. Coach Marsh stood a short distance away, arms crossed, something unmistakably proud in the set of her shoulders. Earl stood at attention near the honor wall itself, dressed once more in the pressed shirt from the hearing, a small collection of medals pinned neatly above the pocket that Joe had never once seen him wear before that evening. Dean Ingram spoke first, brief and sincere, acknowledging the new addition to the ceremony and the story, without naming every detail, that had led the university to finally understand how much it had been failing to see clearly. Then he called Joe's name. She walked forward slowly, the stadium quiet around her, thousands of faces turned toward midfield, and in her hand, carefully cleaned and polished, the silver chain repaired weeks earlier by a jeweler in town, she carried her father's dog tags. She stepped up to the honor wall, where a small brass plaque already bore the name Daniel Calloway, Master Sergeant, United States Army, added that week alongside dozens of others who had served and given everything in that service. She reached up and placed the dog tags gently into a small display case built into the wall beneath his name, exactly the way Earl had helped her design it 2 weeks earlier. A quiet space meant to hold something precious rather than something forgotten. She stepped back. For a moment, the whole stadium was silent, the particular silence of thousands of people choosing, together, without any signal beyond their own understanding, to simply be still. Then, somewhere in the stands, a single person stood. Then another. Then the entire stadium rose together, slowly, without cheering, without noise at all, simply standing. A long, unhurried wave of respect moving through the crowd like wind moving through a field. And it held there for a long moment, quiet and complete, before settling back down. Earl stepped forward and raised a slow, formal salute toward the honor wall, holding it a long moment before lowering his hand. Jo stood very still, her eyes bright, her chest full of something too large for words. And for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel the absence of her father as a wound. She felt it, instead, as something closer to presence, close and steady, the way his voice had felt reading his letter 4 days earlier, the way his lessons had felt every single time her body moved without hesitation to protect someone who needed protecting. Fighting is not about winning, he had told her once, kneeling across from her on an old wrestling mat, correcting the angle of her elbow with 2 gentle fingers. It is about not losing something you can't get back. She had not lost it, not any of it. Not her name, not her dignity, not the people who had stood beside her when it mattered most, not the quiet, steady core of who her father had raised her to be. She had carried it through, exactly the way he taught her to. The game kicked off a short while later, Ashford's new starting quarterback leading the team out under the stadium lights. The crowd's attention shifting, as it always eventually does, back toward the ordinary business of a Friday night in a small college town. But something had shifted in Ashford that would not shift back. A honor wall stood now near the stadium entrance, a small permanent reminder that quiet does not mean weak, and that some debts, once recognized, deserve to be paid properly, in full view of everyone. Jo Calloway had not come to Ashford looking for any of this. She had come simply to cheer, to study, to build a small, ordinary life for herself the way any 18-year-old might. She had never wanted to be anyone's lesson. But sometimes, without asking for it, a person becomes exactly that anyway, simply by refusing to become anything less than who they already were. Later that night, after the game ended and the stadium finally emptied, Jo walked back across the quiet campus with Nora and Paige, the 3 of them talking softly under a sky full of early autumn stars. And near the edge of the football field, where it had all begun weeks earlier, she stopped for a moment, looking out at the empty grass under the stadium lights. "You okay?" Nora asked, noticing her pause. Jo nodded slowly, a small, quiet smile finally settling onto her face, the first easy smile either of her friends had seen from her in weeks. "Yeah," she said. "I think I finally am." She thought of her father one last time that night, not with grief, but with something warmer, steadier, closer to gratitude. He had given her more than training. He had given her a way of moving through the world that no amount of cruelty could shake loose. A quiet, unbreakable center that would carry her, she understood now, through whatever came next, at Ashford and long after it. Somewhere behind them, the stadium lights clicked off one section at a time, the field falling gently into darkness, and the 3 of them walked on together toward the dorms, unhurried, the whole rest of the semester still waiting ahead of them, ordinary and open and entirely their own. Nora's article ran in the campus paper the following week, longer than anything she had written before, careful and precise in exactly the way her mother had taught her good reporting should be. She did not sensationalize any of it. She simply laid out the facts, the timeline, the evidence, letting the story speak for itself the way true stories usually do best. It was read, by the end of that month, by more people than any single piece the paper had published in years, picked up eventually by a regional outlet interested in the broader questions it raised about donor influence in university disciplinary processes. She sent Jo a copy before it was even published, asking, out of respect, whether there was anything Jo wanted changed or left out. "Just tell it the way it happened," Jo told her. "That's all I'd ever ask." Coach Marsh, for her part, quietly began adjusting her own approach to new freshmen in the seasons that followed, watching a little more closely, listening a little harder to the quiet ones, remembering the particular cost of almost missing what mattered most simply because it had not been loud about announcing itself. And Earl Whitcomb, in the years that followed, never did stop showing up early to practice, pushing his mop past the gym doors, watching the new cheer squads warm up each fall, with the same careful attention he had once given a very different kind of training. The kind that had, in its own quiet way, saved far more than one young life along the road that led it here. Ashford State never became a famous school. Its football team never made national news. But for a long while afterward, people in that small town told a particular story when they wanted to explain something about who they hoped to be. A story about a quiet girl who refused to shrink, a promise kept 2 years after it was made, and a set of dog tags that found their way home to exactly the place they belonged. It was not a story about winning. Jo understood that better than anyone, carrying her father's words with her long after that autumn ended. It was a story about what a person chooses to protect, and what they refuse to let anyone take from them, quietly, patiently, for as long as it takes. That, in the end, was the whole of it. Not a fight won, but something far harder and far more lasting finally quietly restored.